Hello everybody, I'm the Bear Bow Brummy. As promised in a previous video, I've decided I'm going to show you how to tie your own nocks. I'm going to do two different types of nock for you. One fairly straightforward, simple one, and then one that's a little bit more complicated. Now you might be asking, why should I bother changing to a tied nock? If you saw the previous video on bow setup, and I'll put a link to it probably up there somewhere later on in the video, you may think, why should I bother changing to a tied nock when the brass one works quite well? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Firstly, there's a weight issue. What you're actually doing is you're attaching a piece of metal to your string, and that's going to have an effect on the way your bow works. Clearly, the extra weight is going to slow it down only a little bit, granted, but it's still going to do that. There's a wear and tear issue with them. What they tend to do, because the brass nock has a slightly sharper edges, it can tear up your tab or your glove, and you don't want to damage those if you can really avoid it. The tied nocks don't do that. And then there's a comfort issue that because of the brass nock sharp edges, they tend to be a little bit uncomfortable on the fingers. The tied nock is just more comfortable. There's a very good reason why the best archers in the world all use tied nocks and don't use the brass ones. So personally, I just like to go with the same way they're going to go. They must be doing it right. Now, before we get round to putting on our new tied nock, we need to take the old brass nock off. Now, before you take the old brass nock off, you need to get the reference point for where your new nock needs to go, because we know that that brass nock is in the correct place because we did our tuning, as you saw in the last video. So all we need to do is duplicate that position on the new one. You see the bow square is already set in place. What I've done is I've used our old friend masking tape there so I can mark where the nock's got to go, because I can never work these things out. You don't need all the markings on the bow square. If you're using your bow square for just your bow, you only need one marking point because it's always going to be the same. So what I'll do is I'll set up the camera a bit closer so you can see what we're doing, and I'll explain to you how to set it all up properly. Okay, back in a minute. So as you can see, I've got the bow square set up so that it's sitting on the bow nicely. I've covered all the markings up with some masking tape because we don't really need those. All we need is one reference point. So what we do is get a ruler and a pen, place it on there just underneath the nock point, and just draw a line, and that'll give you your reference point for your new nock point directly in exactly the same place where the original brass point is. Now all you need to do is take off your brass point and we can get on with doing the new one. Now what I'm going to do is, I've seen many videos on tying nock points, and they all have one issue as far as I'm concerned, is that they use an existing bowstring and some serving thread. The only problem with that is it's quite small, quite fine. It's really difficult to see what they're actually doing. So what I thought I'd do is upscale it a little bit so you can see much more clearly using something a little bit bigger. I'll explain that more in a moment. Just before we move on to that, let me just point out, removing the old brass nock. Be a little bit careful removing the old brass nock. You don't really want to damage any of the serving there. You can use a pair of pliers or open it up with a screwdriver gently and then work it off. But just be careful not to damage your serving. You don't want to end up having to go and buy a new string for no reason at all. Just be careful with it. Okay, so when I said I was going to upscale it a little bit, I really meant I was going to upscale it a little bit. What I've got here is a large rope. You can see how thick that is by next to my hand. And what we're going to use as serving thread is this paracord, because you'll be able to see really clearly, nice and easy, so you can actually see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, let's start with the simple nock point. First, just wrap the serving thread around the back and simply tie a knot in it, like so. Very simple. At this point, put your bow square back on your bow, because now you can adjust the height of this. Just slide it up and down to get it to the right point to match that line that we drew on there earlier. Once you're happy with where the position is, take your two ends, go round the back of the string and tie another knot in it. Just like this. Slide that down so it sits on the top of that thread. Come round to the front, do the same again. Like that. Keep it all nice and neat. Again round the back. Like that. Back to the front again. And keep repeating this. I usually repeat this about 6 times. There's just enough there. There's not too much thread going on there like that. Around again. Close it up a touch. Couple more, I think. Just tie the next one like that, and again. Like that. One more. Like that. And the last one. Like that. There you go. Now what you've got there is your tied knocks finished. All you need to do now is trim off the 2 ends, burn off the 2 ends with a lighter. You might want to put a little dab of super glue on it that solidifies it all up, make it nice and strong and seals it all together. And that's basically the simple one. Easy that, isn't it? So that was the simple one. Just a word on that. Some people tend to coat their serving thread in some hot melt glue just by pulling the serving thread through the hot melt glue a little bit like that. That's fine. That works quite well. It tends to stiffen up the thread, makes it easier to work. You can do that if you want to. I sometimes do that. Sometimes I haven't got any left, so I don't bother doing it. Anyway, the more complicated one. What we're going to need is we're going to need a special tool, and what I'm using for the sake of this is the clear plastic tube from an old pen that I've got. You could use an old short piece of arrow shaft. If you've got a broken arrow, you could use that. But I use a clear plastic one so I can see where the thread's going, because it works better that way. Anyway, first things first, put your plastic tube next to your arrow string and line your thread straight down the string like that, just loosely. Loop it over the top of your thumb and use your thumb to then hold your thumb and your forefinger to hold the string in place. Then loop the string around, loop your serving thread around your string about 6 or 7 times, depending how many you want to do. 4, 5, and 6. Then, here's the clever part. Slide your serving thread up the inside of your plastic tube so it passes the loops you've just made in there. There's just up there like that. You can see it coming out the top. Then remove your plastic tube, grab the end of it. So now what you've got is a loop at the bottom and a loop at the top. You pull the 2 ends like that, so it starts to tighten up. Let's just tidy it up. Pull it tightly. And there you go. That's what's called an endless loop. Because what happens is the 2 ends of the thread will be trapped in behind it. Pull that nice and tightly like that. The same thing applies with the simple one. Cut off your 2 loose ends, maybe a dab of super glue on it just to hold everything in place. If you've used the hot melt glue, if you just use a flame very lightly just to soften the glue, and that'll help stick it all together again. And that's the slightly more complicated one. But, in my opinion, That's a bit better looking, don't you think? Anyway, there you go. That's how to do 2 different tied nock points. So there you go. That's 2 different types of tied nocks you can do, a simple one and a straightforward one. Please have a go at one, because there's a certain satisfaction in tying your own nocks rather than just using the brass ones. And if you've had a go and you quite like the way I did it, and you've had a go yourself and you think, please let me know. I've been the Barebow Brummie. If you wish to subscribe to the channel, click down here somewhere. If you've liked what you've seen, please click down there. All of it helps the channel, helps us be able to produce more content. And thank you for your time. Bye bye.